Hey everybody, welcome to Broadband News. In case you missed it, there was an election this week, so I think that will have some implications for broadband and for telecom policy. I will be right back in a moment. We'll dive into that. Hey there, thanks for joining. Rick Husey here with Broadband News. So yeah, unless you were under a rock, obviously, you know there was an election this week, and it certainly could have an impact on telecom and broadband, as we will now be changing from a Democrat administration to a Republican administration. So I want to talk a little bit about that, and want to look through some articles, maybe comment on those. So let's take a look here. So you can see, first off, this is in Fierce Network. Let's see, here it is. What the Trump win means for the FCC and telecom policy. Though votes are still being counted, the verdict appears to be clear. Donald Trump won, so now what? Historically, the party in power has held a 3-2 majority at the FCC, allowing them to carry out the president's policy agenda. Traditionally, the sitting chair has stepped down, allowing the president to pick a new FCC chief. So the current chair, Jessica Rosenworcel. It's interesting, I think it was maybe a year into the Biden administration before they finally got their final person on the FCC. So Trump. And some of that, I know there were issues with getting people approved in Congress, and Trump will actually have, it looks like, control of the Senate and the House in addition to the presidency. So he shouldn't have that issue, but they will have a 3-2 majority. And so I think he'd get those, somebody on there pretty quickly. And he will likely pick somebody, or will pick somebody, to be the new chairperson. So with Trump in the White House, that means the FCC will be Republican-led and likely by sitting Commissioner Brendan Carr, though Trump hasn't specified his choice for the FCC chair. Carr is the most senior Republican on the commission, and analysts have singled him out as the probable pick. And he is certainly the most vocal whenever there are decisions in the FCC. He's usually posting an opinion. So again, most vocal, pretty conservative. So it remains to be seen whether Trump will pick him, but he certainly is vocal and has his opinions that he's put forward. Carr also, in fact, mentions here, Carr also happens to have authored a chapter in the Project 2025 policy proposal outlining the conservative take on what the future of the FCC should look like under the next Republican president. Project 2025 was a big talking point during the election from the Democrat side. I haven't read it. Donald Trump says he hasn't read it. Donald Trump hadn't heard of it until it was brought up. Project 2025 was something put together, I believe it was by the Heritage Foundation or somebody like that, kind of a conservative think tank, and had articles from all kinds of people on all kinds of things. I've been told from folks that I know that there are some good ideas in there and there are some kind of wacky ideas in there. And again, Trump hadn't read it, so anything, if you're concerned about everything that's in Project 2025, including what Brendan Carr wrote in here, you don't need to be concerned by the fact that it's like going to be the marching orders that everybody's going to have. Because again, Trump hadn't heard of it and was distancing himself from it because he had heard the same kinds of things that, there's some things in there that he would not want to put forward. So anyway, but Carr did write something in there. In fact, that's a letter. Here it is. So you see here. So this is chapter 28, I guess, in the Project 2025 thing. So I linked to everything that I'm going to show today in the description of the video. So you see here, it's the FCC, and it's a fairly long article that he writes. If you want to check that out, so that's there. So, but it mentions, kind of summarizes what he wrote in there here in this article. Let's see. Highlights of this chapter include calls to rein in big tech via the elimination of Section 230 protections for internet companies, what they currently enjoy, to force internet companies to contribute to the Universal Service Fund, to expand the list of companies which are deemed to pose a security risk to the U.S., and to fully fund the RIP and Replace program to swap out suspect telecom equipment. So those are, again, there's some good ideas in Project 2025. They just happen to be in a document that, if it gets associated with that document, could have really negative connotations. But some of these things are not too bad. I've always thought that maybe big tech does need to be providing maybe some funding towards USF, because they certainly benefit from everybody having broadband service, including in rural areas. The other thing about big tech, everybody was always talking about, internet service providers and net neutrality and how they could impact what people could access on the internet. But it turns out, the broadband companies don't want to do that. They want their customers to get everywhere they can on the internet. That's legal. They don't want to stop their customers from getting anywhere because their customers sign up to get broadband so that they can get to the content on the internet that they want to get to. Again, unless it's something illegal, content that should be blocked like child pornography or something like that, then broadband operators want their customers to have full and free access to the content that's available on the internet. However, we have seen that the big tech companies are not necessarily unbiased in how they have maybe blocked certain sites, flagged things, de-promoted kinds of content. So they are probably the bigger challenge when it comes to maybe shaping the things that people hear and see. So it should be a free-for-all. People should be able to get anywhere they want on the internet, and all information should be out there that anybody wants to see, and you can make your own judgments. And again, unless it's dangerous kinds of content or dangerous kinds of speech, and it can't just be dangerous. It's got to be something that can cause problems, or actually that do cause problems. It's like they say, yelling fire in a crowded theater is not free speech. Well, actually it is, and it's not an issue until it causes a problem. We don't want people doing that. We don't want people yelling fire. It's funny, fiber. Got fiber on the brain. So if people yell fire in a crowded theater and there's people stamp out of there and people get killed because of that, then somebody should be prosecuted for that. But that would be for that happening and not actually the speech. So, and again, it's something that with big tech that looks like they want to look into that and look into maybe possibly the Universal Service Fund, and that's one way that we could fund that. And then the rip and replace, maybe adding additional countries that or companies that are in countries that could be a potential security risk. We've got some now that are Chinese related equipment that could be spying on us, and so that equipment is not allowed here in the United States, and that's what that rip and replace program would be, to swap out that kind of telecom equipment that's already in here to be able to provide, make that easier for the service providers that have that equipment. What Trump could mean for the USF, the Universal Service Fund. On the USF front, reform could also come via Republican-led Congress, according to Ted Hearn, policy band publisher and former VP of Industry Association at ACA Connects. Texas Senator Ted Cruz is in a position to become chairman and take the discussion on USF reform in a major new direction. It's interesting about Ted Cruz because I've also heard a lot of the folks in the Senate don't necessarily care too much for him, and they would love it if Donald Trump would appoint him as a Supreme Court judge at some point. Obviously, that would be if somebody stepped down or for some other reason there needed to be another appointment. But that would put him in that position, and they wouldn't have to worry about him in the Senate anymore. And Texas is fairly safe. I don't know. It was a pretty close senatorial election this time. But anyway, so we'll have to see if Ted Cruz just does wind up being that chairman. Instead of relying on fees from broadband providers or big tech, Cruz has argued that the USF should be funded via appropriations from Congress. That way lawmakers can keep a closer eye on where the money goes and what rules are set for broadband programs under the FCC. So right now it's funded through the USF fee that you see on your bill. And the problem with that is it's being funded, it's supposed to go now primarily broadband, right? But it's really, I think, being funded through telephone bills. So we're not getting as much revenue and we have more stuff to be doing with broadband. So the problem I have with the appropriations from Congress, unless they were to appropriate and it was going to be something regular, that didn't have to go through appropriations every year or every few years, is that if you do, like the Affordable Connectivity Program, then eventually maybe you don't fund it, right? So the good thing about the USF and how it's handled now, it's being paid by broadband consumers that can afford the broadband service. And not just that can afford, those that are paying for the broadband service are helping to fund broadband and the other services with USF that are in rural areas, for example. So instead of relying on fees from broadband providers, I said that, okay. Over the next 75 days, it's entirely possible FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel could try to move forward on regulation like the 60-day phone unlocking mandate, tweak pole attachment rules, or ban restrictive clauses in cable programming contracts, Hearn said. But she might find that pointless because some or all of it could be reversed by a Carr-led FCC. And it's going to depend on what it is. In fact, I saw this letter here. I was going to show you. This is from Kathy Morris-Rogers in Washington to Jessica Rosenworcel. She says, and this is a short letter, the results of the 2024 presidential election are now apparent, and leadership of the FCC will soon change. As a traditional part of the peaceful transfer of power, the FCC should immediately stop work on any partisan or controversial item under consideration, consistent with applicable law and regulation. There are many bipartisan consensus items that the FCC could pursue to fulfill its mission before the end of your tenure. I urge you to focus your attention on these matters. And again, that's Kathy Morris-Rogers, chair of the House Energy and Commerce Committee, and that was sent to her and the commissioners. That is an example. I don't know about these other things that are mentioned, if these are controversial or not, but something like net neutrality, for example, not gonna happen. If they get it through now, it'll just be reversed again. So there are certain things that the FCC should just, at this point, not bother trying to do, or should just stop trying to do, I should say, in some cases, and just wait for the next FCC to get in. What Trump could mean for wireless. Carr also advocates for the FCC to free up more spectrum for wireless service, though it's unclear how it would do this given the agency's auction authority lapsed in March 2023 and has yet to be renewed. Carr also indicated Republicans should eliminate policies which allow broadband funding to be used for overbuilding and improve coordination on spectrum policy and infrastructure spending. So certainly we don't want to be providing broadband funding to places that already have broadband. So that's something we need to take serious. And I think the current FCC and NTIA is taking that seriously. They are trying their best to make sure that we had good broadband maps where everything we can hopefully tell as much as possible where there is broadband and where there's not, so that we don't overbuild those areas, because we've got $42.45 billion that needs to be spent in areas that don't have broadband. Now, the concerns people have are that it's in the kind of areas that are on the cusp of what would be broadband, those areas that are, and a service provider says, yeah, well, I've got 100 by 20, so this area is not underserved, or it's served, let's say, in that case. And maybe it's DSL, and maybe it's not. They're not really getting 100 by 20. So those are the kinds of areas that really need to be looked at. There's other areas where it's easily getting broadband service by one or more providers. We don't need to worry about those. We don't need to worry if the service provider says they're providing gig symmetrical service, and when the customer connects, they're only getting 800 by 800. Not a big deal, right? So we don't need to be worrying about those as far as making sure the areas are accurate. What Trump could mean for net neutrality and BEAD. Project 2025 aside, Carr has also opposed net neutrality rules adopted by the FCC, as well as rules designed to regulate the use of artificial intelligence in political ads. I'm not sure why he would be against regulating AI in political ads, because that is kind of scary, what could happen there. Now, as far as net neutrality, we haven't had net neutrality for a long time. So the Barack Obama administration implemented it for a couple of years. Trump came in, went away, was never re-implemented during the Biden administration, although they had pushed in the later part of the administration, pushed to get that implemented, and is in the process of that. The report and order came out, all of that came out. But here we've been, all of this time without net neutrality, and we had years and years without net neutrality prior to Obama, and we still have a net neutral internet. So we don't need to be going down this road. And if there ever is a need to go down this road, it needs to be handled by Congress, and Congress can then enact legislation if they see there are issues. So that's where that belongs. And with the Chevron deference, the Looper-Bright ruling in the Supreme Court, agencies now do not have the leeway if a law is not completely clear, or if there's any kind of vagueness in a law, the agency, like the FCC, does not have the leeway now to say, oh, well, we interpret it this way. If it's not at all clear, if it's a major question, then it's something where the courts have said that the agency does not have the ability to do that. So it really does need to be done in the legislature, which is where really lawmaking is supposed to be, right? The legislature makes the laws, the executive branch then employs those laws. They take the laws and they make it happen. The courts then determine if there's any issues with the constitutionality of the law. That's kind of how our government works. We don't want the executive branch to do everything, including making the law. So that's the reason for that. Let's see. Additionally, he argued against the FCC's decision to revoke Starlink's $885 million rural, or the RDOF subsidy award, calling it regulatory harassment of Starlink owner Elon Musk. Why does that matter? Well, Musk potentially has a lot to gain should policy for the $42 billion BEAD program swing in favor of Starlink satellite service. And really, that's already happened. I don't expect to see anything more. That was under the Biden administration, and I think the Biden administration, I think the way the Biden administration and the NTI have been handling BEAD as far as a preference for fiber, alternative technologies in a case where fiber is, in an extremely high cost area, and even the potential for satellite as a last resort makes sense to me. And that, I believe, is I don't foresee any additional changes, even considering some comments that Donald Trump has made recently. I'll get to those comments, and I'll comment on those comments here shortly when I see them. So I don't think that would happen. It says here, granted, the FCC isn't in charge of administrating BEAD. The NTIA is, but Musk would likely find an ally in Carr, and he probably would. But again, Donald Trump makes the decisions, the final decisions, as well as his administration, and he would have the say there. And I don't think Carr. He was talking about RDOF. Frankly, RDOF at this point, I don't know why we're talking about RDOF. We really need to be making sure that wherever we can use the RDOF funds in a way where it makes sense, such as deploying fiber in areas, if we can make that happen. That's less money that needs to come out of BEAD to do that. But we shouldn't be talking so much about RDOF. We should be focusing on BEAD and just getting RDOF kind of finished out. Musk would also like to find an ally in Trump himself. On a recent episode of Joe Rogan's podcast, Trump said of BEAD, we're spending just to show you, we're spending $1 trillion to get cables all over the country up to upstate areas where you have 2 farms. And they're spending millions of dollars to have a cable. Elon can do it for nothing. Well, and here, in listening to Trump recently, he didn't even know what Starlink was until very recently. He didn't even realize what Starlink was, and that Elon, in addition to being able, he was completely flabbergasted, as was I, when Elon Musk was able to land that huge rocket that came down and was landed on its feet and was captured by the gantry. That was pretty impressive. So. And then he didn't, when he was talking to folks about Hurricane Helene, and people asked him about Musk and Starlink, Trump really didn't even know what Starlink was. So he said, hey, can you get this Starlink over there? And they got people up with internet in hurricane areas, the areas that were hit. So Trump is brand new to all of that stuff. So when he makes a statement like this, just like he used to make statements about COVID and other stuff, he had experts behind him, but then he comes out and he says things in not the most inarticulate way, and maybe comes right off the top of his head. So I think he'll have advice from other people that will tell him, Starlink is, as it should be a potential last resort for BEAD. But even though we could afford to give a lot more people broadband, let's say with Starlink, than if we were to try to get fiber to them, that is not good for the future of our country as far as broadband service. You don't want to be taking all the money and giving it to satellite, because then you got a bunch of people that they're dependent on satellites. They're dependent on one company right now, if that were satellites. We've got Amazon as well that could be participating here at some point in the future, but we don't want to be spending a lot of money to give everybody satellite service, even though it sounds like it makes sense if you don't know a whole lot about it yet. It's like, wow, we could give everybody internet. So Trump is not aware of all of the details as far as fiber broadband, how fast it is, how reliable it is, how it's right there in the ground. It's not satellites that have to be rotated out every 5 years because they start to fail. It's a much more reliable service. So I don't think we have any issues there with Trump trying to switch everybody over to satellite. He's making statements based from ignorance at this point as far as the technology. So we'll see, but I don't expect that to happen. I did talk to, as far as where we go with BEAD, I had a conversation last week with Lori Adams from Nokia, and we talked about all kinds of things related to BEAD, including, I asked her the question, this was a week before the election, approximately. I think it was maybe exactly a week, if I remember. Maybe it was, I think it was the Wednesday. So I asked her, what happens? We have a change of administration coming. Could be Harris, could be Trump. What do you see in each situation, depending on who wins? So I was going to go ahead and play that section right now to give you an answer of what she's thinking. She had a lot of good insight on BEAD in general, and on this answer, I thought she was right on target. And I'll also link to this, by the way. So if you want to check out that stream from last week, there's a link to this, the full stream, in the description of this video. But here is Lori Adams answering that question.
So I get asked this question, I think, every day. And two things. One is that there will be a change in the administration, period, right? So you will have someone new in the office of president, meaning they will be putting in new cabinet folks, new FCC, new people all over the place, right? It's going to rely on the nomination system to process, the political positions. That won't change the civil servants, the people that are, currently in positions that work in agencies that come to work every day, regardless of who the president is in the change of administration. So there's some continuity that will be there from, just the top levels will change, but the bottom and middle levels will stay the same. As a legal matter, BEAD is a pretty secure program because it was appropriated through Congress. It was signed into law. It was enacted by the president. It was signed by him. So it is it's off to the side. It's been enacted. The money's there. The programs are underway. The states have the money. It's in process. So I think there's little threat that you would see Congress claw this program back or kill it, right?
It is a very
it is a very popular program with the states, with governors,
with Republicans.
With Republicans.
Yeah.
I mean, I was in Indiana this summer and heard a presentation by the chairman of the finance committee who said, look, we have been investing in broadband as a state. We are holding off additional monies allocated for broadband because we want to see how far BEAD will go. Mm-hmm. So, they are invested in making sure that BEAD is a success. So I don't expect much change with a Harris administration, business as usual. Maybe some things will start to move faster. With a Trump administration, the more likely scenario is that they begin to waive some of those requirements that are considered to be the more, problematic. Mm-hmm. Some of the labor and wage requirements, some of the climate stuff, some of the other policy aspects that weren't part of the original act, but that NTIA included as in the NOFO. There's also a risk of potential slowdown of the program because you need people at NTIA level to process approvals for things to become final. And so, that is at risk of potentially delays. But, ultimately, I think people really want this program to go faster. We are on the verge of 2 states issuing out provisional awards. Louisiana could come out at any moment. They need to submit their full proposal, final plan to NTIA December 30th or 15th. And they have a 30-day period where they have to publish the list of winners for public comment. So we're going to start to see sub awards handed out very quickly. And, I think the train has really come too far. It's about to speed up. But the most likely scenario is that if Trump is in there, that the administration moves things, waives some of the more problematic provisions.
Yeah. So again, some great insight there from Lori, where we covered lots of things about BEAD. So check that out. Again, that's down in the description of the video where you can find that full stream. So back to the article here. So what Trump could mean for wireless. Carr also advocates for the FCC to free up more spectrum for wireless service, though it's unclear how it would do this given the agency's auction authority lapsed in March 2023 and is yet to be renewed. So again, that's something that the new Congress coming in could take care of if that were a priority for them. Carr also indicated Republicans could eliminate policies which allow Broadband funding to be used for overbuilding and improved coordination on spectrum policy and infrastructure spending. What Trump could mean for net neutrality, BEAD. Did I already go through this? Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Yeah, I did, sorry. Okay, next, so here, this is, so what does the Trump U.S. election win mean for telecom? This is in Mobile World Live. A couple of things I wanted to point out here. So Roger Entner, founder and analyst at Recon Analytics, expects senior Republican Commissioner Brendan Carr to be named chair of the FCC, so he agrees there. He's been pretty outspoken. I think we'll see a greater emphasis on satellite and multimodal technology agnosticism for programs like BEAD. So I think that's again maybe looking at not just fiber, but fixed wireless and satellite. But again, I think the FCC has done a good job of walking that line, so hopefully they'll keep that policy in place. Entner, Strand consultant analyst John Strand, and disruptive analysis founder Dean Bubley expect the FCC and Carr to pull the plug on recent attempts to revive net neutrality, which was rescinded during the previous Trump administration. I would totally agree that that will be pulled. Deregulation will be the order of the day, Strand said. Again, it mentions the Spectrum Authority here. Politicians, industry groups, and operators have strongly stated there's a growing need for access to more spectrum. Strand said the Senate will likely take up spectrum reauthorization and pipeline buildup, something that is sorely needed. It may well be that Trump helps the FCC gets its groove back, Strand noted. Space and satellite are poised to advance in a GOP Republican administration. And again, space and satellite, if it's used in the right way, in certain areas as far as broadband or in other areas that they may be talking about here, that's a good thing. Bubley stated that allocation of spectrum remains unknown going forward. Entner said a second Trump administration could make the Department of Defense more pliable. That's how we got the 3.45 megahertz spectrum, which is, I think they're talking there about C-band spectrum. It was the White House coming down on the DOD, and then suddenly things worked out. So what they're talking about there is the Department of Defense, the Navy, had access to all of this spectrum, excellent mid-band spectrum that could be used for 5G fixed wireless, and they came up with this plan to share that spectrum through CBRS spectrum, and then C-band spectrum really is what I'm thinking of there. But CBRS was a way to share spectrum among, think about it. CBRS was the Navy. C-band was the satellite band used for cable TV, those kinds of things. So they did clear out spectrum for that. But this 3.45, that is CBRS. So in that spectrum, the Navy had that as the incumbent, and a spectrum sharing arrangement was made where now you can get that, you can get licenses for that. They can be priority access licenses where you have use of that spectrum on your own, or you can get general access licenses where you share that with other general access licenses. And there's a sharing methodology there that if the Navy is using it, it's automatically, you're told automatically that a ship's coming into harbor, for example, and then you have to switch somebody over to a different portion of the spectrum. I believe it's working great, and that is an area where that's the kind of thing that they might do to, be innovative, let's say. The CHIPS Act, there was talk by some Republicans in recent weeks about tweaking the CHIPS Act, which was enacted under current President Joe Biden. Both Democrats and Republicans want to insource things. There's not a big difference between the two of them, Entner said. And that could be kind of a not invented here kind of thing. The CHIPS Act, I don't know all the details on that. It is kind of aimed at getting something very important, getting chips manufactured here and not overseas, so that it's, for our own purposes as far as just consumer technology, but also very important for our strategic technology and our defense, that we be able to have access to that. I believe, it's interesting here. It's about to talk about tariffs, but I believe what Trump was saying the other day was that he would have done it differently, where rather than paying companies to come in and build factories here, he would have just said, we're just going to apply tariffs unless you build your factories here, rather than having to pay to do that. So that might have been the difference there, was maybe to get them to come in here by saying, you got to build your stuff here, or we're going to put tariffs on it if it comes in. Tariffs, Trump is vocal about instituting tariffs on foreign goods brought into the U.S. Bloomberg reported he has threatened to impose tariffs as much as 60% on Chinese goods. So again, that's, when Trump talks about tariffs and putting tariffs on everything, again, I take that as kind of, just the way he speaks, because he's always been kind of targeted on that in certain situations. And, China, for example, not taking any of our goods, and we're taking all of their goods. That was the point of that. And the tariffs that he put on China, the Biden administration did not take those off because they were working. So we'll have to see what happens there. Bubbly noted it's unclear what the impact of tariffs will be on the telecom sector and what they would apply to. They may apply to vendors like Ericsson with U.S. manufacturing. They may help vendors like Ericsson with U.S. manufacturing, but the telcos will still need lots of imports, he explained. It's the same question about chips and phones. So again, we want to have the chips and stuff. We want stuff built here. Again, in some cases, it's for national security. It may be, just to have good employment for Americans here. If we send everything overseas, then we're sending jobs overseas as well. So there is the downside of that in that you're losing access to cheap goods. So Americans, prices may go up, but then again, in China, the people they have making this stuff are almost treated like slaves. So maybe that's a good thing that we have to pay a little bit more, but people in China don't have to live like that. And again, countries, for the most part, are welcome to build their factories here, and then that helps employ Americans, and it helps keep the technology here on our soil. Regulatory environment. Bubbly said that the second coming of Trump may not be great news for tech giants such as Google and Meta platforms, given U.S. concerns about big tech and censorship, as I had mentioned earlier. Amazon and Apple and maybe Microsoft may be less impacted, but I'm really unsure. And of course, there's Twitter, which now is owned by Elon Musk, which a lot of folks on the left were not happy about, but it did go from being a platform that was really controlled. The government was controlling what was said on there. That was proven through the Twitter files, and then also it was very much one-sided. And now, what I think the left side doesn't like is that everybody can say whatever they want on there, almost to some extent, which could be on the left and on the right. So the right actually has a voice on there now. And that's really the way it should be, again, for the most part, is when you're talking about these social platforms. Everybody needs to have a voice. You can't have an arbiter of misinformation, because when you do, a lot of times they're wrong. That was like with COVID. There was a lot of misinformation. For example, it was tagged misinformation about COVID, and it turned out to be true. It was not misinformation. The misinformation was actually coming from the sources that were saying it was misinformation. So it's best to have as much information out there as possible, and then everybody can debate and argue over that information, and eventually the truth comes out, rather than restricting the voices of some. That's not a good idea. Let's see what else we got here. Trump satellites. So under Trump, satellites could steal fiber's BEAD bonanza. And again, I think we talked a little bit about here. I'll see if there's anything else in here. It's very likely that the incoming Trump administration will smile on satellite internet companies such as SpaceX's Starlink and Amazon's Project Kuiper. It was interesting. A couple weeks ago, Jeff Bezos came out, and it was a editorial or something in the Washington Post, which he owns. So he's got ownership in Amazon and then Project Kuiper under that, and then the Washington Post, the newspaper. And he came out and he said, we're not going to endorse in the election. And the folks at the Washington Post went nuts, and they lost like 200,000 subscribers when they didn't endorse Kamala Harris. And then about the same time, one of his folks met with Donald Trump. One of his folks from Amazon, Project Kuiper, met with Donald Trump, and people were connecting the dots there and saying, oh, that's why he's doing that. And Bezos was like, I had no idea that was going on. So it's not related to that at all. He was just saying that, that the public has lost trust in the media, and that was his point. So anyway, I think, Trump, obviously he's buddies with Elon Musk. Elon Musk has done a lot for him and his campaign, but I think he did meet, from what I heard, with the folks from Amazon Project Kuiper. So that's another competitor to Starlink. Republicans will control the White House, the Senate, and possibly the House. It's looking more and more like it's going to be the House as well. In fact, gaining seats from what they had before. An alignment that will likely trigger a new approach on national communications policy in 2025, wrote Ted Hearn. The BEAD program, under heavy GOP criticism for failing to fund a single broadband project in 3 years and for favoring fiber over other technologies, is likely to get a facelift, with more funding allocated to unlicensed fixed wireless, Elon Musk's Starlink, and Amazon Project Kuiper once operational, Hearn continued. But again, I don't expect much of a change there. I think, as I mentioned, if Starlink had not been addressed prior to Trump coming in, then I could see that happening. But right now, it has been addressed, and the NTIA has outlined, when it would be appropriate to use something like Starlink or Project Kuiper, Amazon's satellite service. And same with fixed wireless. It's addressed in there. You want to use those alternative technologies when you are at a point where you can't, you don't have the budget to be able to do fiber. So I don't expect any changes there. I really don't, even with the new administration coming in. Although satellite and fixed wireless companies may be eligible, was one other thing I was going to say here. Oh, yeah, that's right. So, again, under heavy GOP criticism for failing to fund a single broadband project in 3 years. So I predicted this was going to happen way back in June or earlier, prior to the first debate between Trump and Biden. I thought this was going to come up because this was, I knew this was going to be a talking point for Republicans as far as the campaign, because they were already talking about the electric car chargers, the $8 billion spent to make 8 chargers. And I knew there was going to be $42.45 billion that has not gotten a single person up on broadband. I knew that was going to come up in the election, and certainly did. Although satellite and fixed wireless companies may be eligible for some of the funding, Biden administration rules likely would funnel the bulk of BEAD to fiber operators and their vendors. And it is under the current rules, and again, I don't expect to see big changes there. However, states have not yet begun issuing grants through the program, and a Trump administration may be able to affect the distribution of those state-level funds. I don't expect it. I expect the changes, as Lori was talking about, I think changes in the kinds of things that have maybe caused it to be delayed longer than it should have been. There were things that the broadband map was very important to get done, and there was that took a long time, and there was a challenge when the FCC picked the vendor cost quest. There was a challenge by another vendor. That took additional time. And we wanted to make sure we do this right. We want to make sure that we're not overbuilding, something that Brendan Carr was very interested in making sure we don't do. We want to make sure we don't overbuild. So we need to know where there is broadband. Lots of rules, but maybe too many rules, too many regulations, as Laurie was saying. Some of the things that the Trump administration will probably come in and change, if they can, would be to do waivers for things like environmental rules, maybe labor requirements, having to hire union workers. Although Trump got a lot of votes from union workers, he got the rank and file. He got a ton of votes from the rank and file and unions. But still, I think to be able to make this happen faster, they need to provide leeway for service providers on who they're going to hire, because to try to do everything the way that it is in there right now is just going to make it more expensive, number one, for the consumer, and number two, is going to make it take longer. Let's see, if Trump wins, the BEAD program is likely to see a delay in spending relative to a Harris win, and a reduction in expenditure for fiber relative to a Harris win. I don't expect too much of that. Summarized Blair Levin, policy advisor for New Street. Levin also cited Trump's recent comments that SpaceX Starlink satellite service provides internet connections that are better than wire. So again, that's a uneducated opinion from Trump in the heat of the moment, when he had just a very little bit of information. It reminds me of the bleach comment that so many people said Donald Trump said people should inject bleach into their veins during COVID. He did not say that, but he had just gotten out of a meeting right prior to one of the COVID updates that he was doing with Mike Pence and others, and he had just gotten out where people were talking about how they might have been using bleach as an analogy, how you could kill germs, and how you might be able at some point in the future to have something intravenously put in that could kill the virus. So then he somehow said that. He wasn't telling people to inject bleach, but that's the kind of thing that would come out of his mouth. He was something new for him. It's like, hey, did you know this? So I don't expect that, I don't expect that he's going to put satellite service everywhere in place of fiber. Trump and Musk. SpaceX founder Elon Musk campaigned heavily for Donald Trump and could potentially play some kind of role in his administration, and Trump is clearly aware of Musk's business and priorities. What Donald Trump has said he wants Elon Musk to do is to get control of the out-of-control spending, and not just that, but to find areas of waste. So hopefully that will be Trump's role. Not Trump, that will be Musk's role, and it may not be as an official person in the cabinet. It may just be, he's got plenty of time, right? As Trump has said, he's got plenty of time. right? He's just doing satellites, and he's doing he's doing Starlink. He's got SpaceX. He's got Twitter. He's got plenty of time to do something else. So that is what Trump has said a role might be for Musk, would be looking at the government and figuring out why there's so much waste, and then trying to get rid of that waste. We're spending $1 trillion to get cables all over the country. Here's where he's talking about it again. To upstate areas where you have 2 farms, that same thing. Elon can do it for nothing. I don't think those two things are connected. I think the government waste, will hopefully be in other areas, other departments, because certainly other folks would come to him, probably including Elon Musk, and say, really, fiber is what you want to have in most places. Although SpaceX is a major government contractor for rocket launches, the company's Starlink satellite internet business has been mostly blocked from federal programs like BEAD and the FCC's RDOF program. Instead, the Biden administration has favored funding fiber-based internet services. And again, I'm kind of back to this. If you do have two farms that it's just too expensive to get fiber to, and it's too expensive to do, or too hard to get fixed wireless, maybe there's not the line of sight you need or something like that to be able to get fast fixed wireless, then maybe satellite is the answer there. And that may have been, who knows, that may have been what Elon Musk said to Donald Trump was, hey, if you got these 2 places where you can't get these other services, we can do it up there. We got the satellites already up there. So Trump's like, it costs nothing. They're already up there. Well, there is a cost, obviously, to it. But yes, the satellites are already up there. So it says here that may change when Trump fills leadership positions at the FCC, which administers RDOF, and the NTIA, which administers BEAD. For example, FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr again, widely expected to be Trump's nominee to hold the agency, outspoken for his support on Starlink, said it would be fair to get Starlink back into the FCC's RDOF program. We talked about that. He also suggested up to a third of BEAD's $42.45 billion could be used for satellite internet. Terrible idea. So hopefully that doesn't go anywhere. That's a terrible idea. I think there's no reason to do that at all. If we got the money there, let's get fiber. BEAD is perhaps the biggest injection of federal funding into the U.S. telecom industry ever, but it has been plagued with delays, as we mentioned. Companies interested in the program initially hoped to begin receiving funds last year, and now many don't expect BEAD funds to be available until 2026. And that's true. Again, with my conversation that I had with Laura, you might check that out. She was saying the same thing, that by the time they go through all the steps, which she kind of outlined, that looks like the time frame. That appears to have scared off some big players. For example, cable company Charter Communications, a major RDOF participant, recently said it doesn't expect to pursue BEAD funding in a big way. Other companies that were banking on BEAD, for example, Corning CEO cited BEAD as a major catalyst for the fiber cabling supplier, as you would expect, starting in the second half of next year. And many smaller regional fiber network operators, such as Windstream, Brightspeed, Altice USA, and others, have signaled an interest in pursuing BEAD grants. Yes, and I think it is going to be a lot of the big guys. I think because of some of the regulatory hurdles that would be in place for broadband service providers, there are probably smaller broadband service providers that are like, I don't know if I want to do this. So maybe that can be where Trump can come in, the Trump administration come in and cut some of those kind of onerous regulations that have nothing really to do with broadband. And maybe that will make it more palatable for the small companies, which is really what the NTIA and the Biden administration wanted in the first place. They were looking for not-for-profits like electric membership co-ops and municipalities and smaller independent community-based ISPs to be getting these funds in preference over the major large companies. They're trying to keep prices down for everybody. That's one way to do it. So if you get rid of some of these onerous regulations, then maybe some of the smaller ISPs would be wanting to participate where they might not now. Financial analysts at New Street last year estimated that BEAD could boost the enterprise value of companies like AT&T, Consolidated Communications, Frontier Communications, Lumen, and Verizon by a combined $17 billion or 7%. Now, though, Trump could upend those calculations. I don't see why, unless, again, some smaller independent operators, cities, and whatever decide to participate, and then you then you're competing against someone else. So you got an AT&T coming in trying to compete against a local entity, a municipality, a electric membership co-op, or even an independent cable operator or phone company. So that's one way it could upend those calculations for those larger companies. And then finally, Cruz wins Texas. Likely Senate Commerce Chair supports appropriations for USF. We talked a little bit about Ted Cruz. So with the Senate also in Republican hands, he's seen as a likely candidate for chair of the Senate Commerce Committee. Cruz expressed support for a major shakeup of the already imperiled USF, funding the $8 billion per year broadband subsidy through congressional appropriations. We kind of talked about this. To get spending under control, says Congress, not the FCC, must take charge of defining USF universal service and deciding where the funds go, he wrote in a report this year. Program supports 4 main broadband programs aimed at subsidizing rural networks and internet discounts for schools and libraries, rural healthcare centers, and low-income households. The fund is broadly considered in need of reform as its contribution base of interstate voice revenue shrinks. And that's really, again, what the problem is. It's based on this internet voice revenue. That goes down, and it used to be funding internet, or it used to be funding phone service. Now it's funding broadband. So they need to broaden the base of where they're getting the contributions from. The GOP isn't entirely aligned on Cruz's appropriations. A bipartisan group of lawmakers from both chambers of Congress, which includes Republican House Commerce leadership, but not Cruz, has been working since last year to craft legislation that would reform the USF by tapping more companies' revenue for funding. The FCC's senior Republican, Brendan Carr, and other lawmakers have floated, adding big tech companies, as I mentioned. We think a critical mass of Republicans is likely to support assessing tech revenues, said Blair Levin. The agency's current chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, argued that companies deploying in rural areas depend on a consistent funding source to plan and maintain their networks, and subjecting USF to congressional budget negotiations could make that funding source less stable. And yeah, it's true, like the ACP. She appointed the ACP, a separate low-income broadband subsidy that provided a larger discount than its USF counterpart. The program ran out of money in June after lawmakers failed to reach a deal to extend it. Cruz himself intervened to block a bill that would have provided short-term funding for the program, both because of disagreements over the spectrum auctions that would have provided the funding and a desire to tighten the ACP's affordability requirements. And I understand that. So again, this is something that, it was a huge amount of money, $19 million, I think it was, and it lasted about two and a half years, and would last even less if we kept the amount of the subsidy the same and the number of people that can apply for it. Because right now it's over 4 out of 10 households could apply for the ACP. So that's a problem. It's so expensive to try to do that. So they really do need to they need to ratchet down who can actually get access to the ACP funds if they were going to do legislation, or if they're going to fund it through the USF. In any event, they need to reduce it from something less than 4 out of 10 households being able to get that subsidy, because that means that 6 out of 10 households are paying for the broadband for 4 out of 10 households. That's not sustainable. Cruz wrote in his USF report that it may make sense to keep the high-cost program within the current USF funding framework, given ongoing multi-year commitments to providers. That's a program that funds the rural infrastructure deployments. Any efforts to reform the fund will depend on the result of a legal challenge likely to be taken up by the Supreme Court. In July, the Fifth Circuit broke with existing precedent and found that the fund illegally takes taxing power away from the legislature. Both the FCC and the conservative nonprofit challenging the fund are asking the High Court to intervene and hand down a final ruling. The case is scheduled for conference when justices will consider whether or not to take the case next week on November 15th. It'll be interesting now that the election is over, whether they decide to take that case or punt and see what happens with the new administration and the new FCC there. So this article was in, I think this was in Broadband, Broadband Breakfast. So anyway, again, I linked to all of this. All these articles are linked in the description of this video, including that video that I did with Lori Adams, if you want to check that out. So again, very interesting here with what we're looking at now after the election's done. It would have been things would have continued on pretty much the same under a Harris administration. Things are definitely going to shake up under the Trump administration, but I think some of the things that people are worried about as far as telecom policy, those kinds of things, not going to be as significant. Again, I don't expect that BEAD's going to shift to 30-40% satellite coverage. I'm hoping actually that it stays kind of in the balance that it's looking at right now, which I think they've come along. They're a long way down the road, made a lot of progress. We're getting to a point now where Louisiana and some others are going to start letting us know who their service providers are that are going to be doing the work. So we're very close now to BEAD getting to the next step. Now, again, it's going to take until very late next year or more, to where we see anything being built, and then maybe even later, early, in 2020, 6. It could go that far before even the first fiber is going in the ground in that case. So we got a long way to go, but we've come a long way. We shouldn't rock the boat too much, but there are some things they can do, take out some of those regulations to make things go a little faster, to keep the prices down a little bit more, to get more service providers, smaller service providers interested in the program. So those would be good changes that we would not have seen had the Harris administration kept control of the FCC and the federal government. So appreciate you joining me today. Thanks. Interesting topic, long topic, but it was a long election process, wasn't it? It took a really long time, and now it's over. And now it starts again. It's almost like Christmas. Christmas is over, and then you start thinking about next Christmas. Well, the election's over, and now we're thinking about the next election coming up. I'm sure people are starting to jockey for that. So again, thanks for joining me today. If this was interesting, if you found it helpful or anything, if you give me a like on the video, just hit the thumbs up there. I'd appreciate that. Subscribe to our channel. Click the subscribe button. Make sure that little bell is rung there, and you'll be notified when I am live. I will see you next time for Broadband News. Take care. Bye-bye.